Hi, everyone, and welcome back. We're going to talk about intermittent reinforcement and how intermittent reinforcement promotes generalization. You should have a fairly good idea of what intermittent reinforcement is because we talked about it in our section on the basic reinforcement schedules. So, what is it? Reinforcement is provided only some of the time for the target behavior. And there was those 4 schedules that we learned, like fixed ratio, which means you have a fixed amount of responses, and at the end of that fixed amount, you provide reinforcement. So a fixed ratio 4 would be 4 responses reinforcement, 4 responses. You have a variable ratio schedule where it's an average amount of responses and they get reinforcement. And then you have the interval schedule, fixed interval, meaning there's a fixed amount of time. The first response after that amount of time, they get reinforcement. And then a variable interval schedule where on a variable amount of time, so it changes, but it averages out to something, they get reinforcement. So we use continuous reinforcement when we're doing skill acquisition, so we can build that skill and make sure it builds. And then after that, we want to go to an intermittent reinforcement. Now, intermittent reinforcement schedules are more resistant to extinction than continuous reinforcement. This is a concept that is very difficult for people to understand and will always be a question on all these tests. If you're always getting reinforcement every single time you engage in the behavior, like a water fountain, every time you press the button for a water fountain, you drink water. Extinction happens when you no longer get water when you press the water fountain button because the water fountain's broken. If you always get it before, the behavior will diminish faster with continuous reinforcement because you realize right away there's a problem, like this isn't working, and you might really quickly have your extinction burst, press, really, is this really not working? Oh yeah, it's not working, and then you stop doing that because it's always been continuous. Now, if there was a water fountain that you had to press 5 times to get the water, and so it just was poorly maintained. It's often broken, but then it gets fixed, you get it, then it's broken. You're gonna continually, when it's permanently broken, not getting fixed again, you'll press that button for a lot longer than you would in that continuous schedule because you're used to it not working sometimes. So you just keep trying because you're like, oh, this is the time it's not working. Maybe they'll fix it tomorrow. Okay, I'm going to try today. Oh, maybe they'll fix it the next day. So intermittent schedules are really hard to extinguish because people are used to not every response being reinforced. So they try a little longer. Why this matters in ABA, intermittent patterns are really important because they mimic real life. Real life, rarely are things continuously reinforced, sometimes, but not as often as intermittently reinforced. It promotes generalization and maintenance. By providing reinforcement on intermittent schedules, the learner is more likely to continue to use the schedule even when reinforcement is not guaranteed every time. It encourages persistence and independent use of the skill. If you go to an intermittent reinforcement schedule and the parents forget to reinforce something, or say it's like manning, they're asking for something and the parent's busy, so they don't immediately give it to them. Because it's on an intermittent reinforcement schedule, it won't be extinguished just by these small mistakes or environmental changes. It helps fade prompts and external rewards. So it does help us get rid of those external rewards and really focus on the natural rewards. Okay, so continuous. With continuous, we have a really, really fast acquisition rate. It has low resistance to extinction. It has a high likelihood of becoming prompt dependent or reinforcer dependent. And then our intermittent schedules, there's a much slower acquisition rate. It has a very high resistance to extinction, and it has a very low prompt dependency rate. Intermittent reinforcement, where reinforcement is provided only some of the time the behavior occurs, is a powerful tool for promoting generalization and maintenance of skills. This approach mimics real-life reinforcement patterns, encourages the learner to persist in using the skill even when rewards are not guaranteed over time. That's how it promotes generalization. It's a huge part of generalization. We have to understand how to use it. So we have those 4 schedules. We have the fixed ratio where there's 5 there's a number, and after that many responses, they get reinforcement. And then we have variable ratio schedule where it's an average, so the responses are varied, but it's still on average. And then we have fixed interval, so a set amount of time, the first response they get reinforcement, and then variable interval where it's an average amount of time. The minutes change, but they average out to something. And what the first response after that time interval, they get reinforcement. So which one are we going to use? This has a lot to do with what the schedules look like. Fixed schedules are predictable, so they are more resistant to extinction. Variable schedules are more resistant to extinction, and fixed schedules are more likely to be extinguished. When thinking about generalization, what we want with generalization, so extinction is this concept that I taught you, how we diminish behavior, but it's also something we need to think about when building behavior. Like, if someone put this on extinction by accident, would this behavior disappear? Good behavior I want to see. It's better to use those variable schedules if you don't want the behavior ever to be extinguished, if there's mistakes in the environment or they don't always get reinforced. Variable ratio schedules, similar to slot machines, are the best for building strong, persistent behavior. Consider a variable ratio if we're going to generalization. That's how slot machines are. It's a variable amount of responses pulling that bar to win something. As you know, gambling's addictive, and there's lots of people who spend a lot of their life sitting at those slot machines. It's because they're using the schedule. So extinction, it's very resistant to extinction. Even though for 3 months they never get anything, they just keep pulling. And after that 3 months, they get something, even a medium something or a small something that keeps them going for so long. So the behaviors never extinguish. It's very hard to extinguish those behaviors. Again, you can think about this in an opposite way too. When you see a problem behavior, if the problem behavior is on a variable schedule already, you know it's going to be a hard behavior to work with because of this. Consider the learning stage. Start with continuous reinforcement for new skills and then go to an intermittent reinforcement when the skill's fluent so that you can promote generalization. You want to match the schedule to the learner. Choose the reinforcement schedule that best supports the learner's progress and target environments. Track and adjust as needed. Move to a schedule that matches the environment. If it's demanding, like it's teaching them to say more, look at how the natural environment deals with that. Are the parents, like if it's a home, are the parents super attentive to the kids and constantly, if they say more, they're getting more? There's parents like that. And then there's parents who, might work from home, might have multiple kids, might have a lot going on, and they might not catch every more. So that's going to be something that you want to put on a thinner schedule the more so that the behavior never extinguishes in that home environment. But if it's a home environment with their first child, attentive parents, there's always a parent there who's not working, then we might not need to think about that because no one's going to ever forget or accidentally not reinforce them more. So your role in using this is you want to start with continuous reinforcement with supervision. Make sure you're talking to your supervisors about this to initially teach a new skill and help the learner acquire it quickly. Then you're going to switch to an intermittent schedule as they become fluent. Your supervisor will help you choose that schedule based on the environment and like what's going to happen after you leave. You're going to keep records on what schedule you're using. So always document and keep those records strong. Then you're going to fade prompts along with fading reinforcement. So you're going to systematically fade both the use of prompts and the delivery of reinforcement to encourage the learner's new independent use of the skill. So here's an example of fading reinforcement for demanding for help. It's continuous reinforcement. We're going to reinforce every instance of the learner saying, help me, with immediate praise and like access to the item or whatever sort of help you need. As a skill is fluid, you might switch to a fixed ratio schedule, such as reinforcing every third response. Not every environment is going to immediately provide help for the person. If they're in that environment, then that's great, and you don't have to think about this. But not everyone's in that environment. And you don't want the help to disappear because of the environment. So we have to try to match this to the environment so the help never disappears. Then you might go to a variable schedule if you find it unpredictable when people will reinforce them. That is most likely the case. It's unpredictable. I don't know when the sibling's going to be crying and mom has to pick up the sibling. I don't know when mom has a work call and has to tell them, like, not now, I'm going to help you in a second. So it's going to most likely be unpredictable, and that's why you always want to use those variable schedules. You want them to get used to that unpredictability. Maybe the mom will reinforce 3 times, but then 3 times go by and she's not able to reinforce. The final goal is for the learner to independently ask for help in different settings without needing reinforcement on a schedule that will make sure that the behavior continues on. How intermittent reinforcement supports generalization. Intermittent reinforcement reflects the unpredictable nature of rewards in our natural environment. So it helps the learner become persistent and independent. It also will encourage our learners to use the skill independently. It promotes generalization across different settings. If you change your schedule to a variable ratio, it will touch all the settings you're in. So you find the setting with the most thin schedule, the least amount of reinforcement. You want to get to that schedule, like match it. But at school, this child asking for help, that might be reinforced every single time at school, but maybe not. Maybe it's a really difficult class and the teacher is dealing with a lot of things to support in the class. And so maybe help me won't be reinforced every time. So it just depends on that. But maybe in school it is. So you find your thinnest schedule that they have to do the behavior in and you match that. And what will happen is in those other schedules, they'll continue to use the behavior because it will be reinforced or have denser reinforcement than the thin schedule. Intermittent schedules make the behavior more durable and less likely to disappear when reinforcement is not provided. So common mistakes is moving to intermittent reinforcement too early. Like you have to be really careful. You can't do this too early until the skill is acquired and fairly strong and well established under continuous reinforcement, and then reinforcing errors or approximations after switching to intermittent. So you don't want to backtrack in intermittent reinforcement. So you don't want to start reinforcing approximations again. What will happen is they'll only do the approximation. So you don't want to accidentally reinforce those errors. And then using unpredictable schedules without tracking data. So, you just move to a variable schedule and don't tell anyone. It's going to confuse everybody. It's going to confuse your supervisor, the other tech, and this won't be a fluid process, people. Forgetting to fade both prompts and reinforcement. So you have to fade the prompts too. I've seen lots of people, especially verbal prompts, because we talk all the time, but sometimes people forget to fade those prompts. So your data collection tips: track response counts before reinforcement, log how many responses the learner made before receiving reinforcement on the current schedule. Make sure you have all the response count data so you know how many responses they needed for reinforcement. Document the reinforcement schedule. Note whether you're doing a fixed, variable, intermittent, interval, or ratio. Note maintenance across environments. Observe if the behavior persists in different settings, not just the training environment. So what happens is like you're training in the training environment, but you'll probably be with them in other environments. When that's occurring, make sure you're taking data about whether you're seeing the behavior occur. And then always share your data with your supervisor and talk about communication, your successes and challenges when fading. So final takeaways: intermittent reinforcement builds real-world behavior strength. Reinforcement is provided Only some of the time the target behavior occurs, mimicking real-life reinforcement patterns. You're going to play a key role in fading reinforcement intentionally and strategically. So you're a big part of this. You have to be sure you know what you're doing, documenting what you're doing, and following the protocol pretty well. And then you're going to use it after a skill is mastered to promote generalization and maintenance. So you help the skill transfer across people and places and materials, reflects a natural environment where rewards aren't guaranteed every single time. Match the schedule to the learner's progress and environment. Use variable ratio schedules to build strong, persistent behaviors and adjust based on the current skill level and setting. Okay, this is it for skills. You got through the skills section, which is a big accomplishment within the 40-hour training. We're going to now go into documentation, professionalism, and ethics, and then you'd be done with the course. Give yourself a pat on the back, take a break, celebrate because you're through a huge portion, kind of the meat of this course. Good job. I'll see you next video.